Hey, it's Sean from the Commander's Brew. This week we're doing Bane, Lord of Darkness. How is this not right out of Batman? Is this from actual D&D? You merely adopted the dark, I was born in it, formed by it. Does Christopher Nolan play D&D? Anyway, so of course I'm going to have some Batman references, but I'm going to take you on the journey of how this deck came together. I think Bane is pretty interesting to brew around, even if you didn't think so at first glance. And just be patient for the Batman stuff. It'll come. I think Bane, Lord of Darkness is pretty cool, not too expensive for a commander. He's a god, so he's got some sort of indestructibility cause, and that's less than half your starting life total, or equal to. Equal to counts too. But the key here is the trigger when non-token creatures die. Your opponents get to pick what happens, so we think that's bad. But we can figure out a way to brew so that isn't so bad. We obviously care about a lot of creatures. Non-token creatures dying is the name of the game. So let's try to make sure our utility creatures kind of do the things we need to do. Let's start with ramp. Can't talk about any deck that doesn't have green and not mention the blue Harrow guy. I know he's not the blue Harrow guy, but it's the blue Harrow guy. Essentially, once this creature's out, you get to cast Harrow every turn by using the ability. 3 mana, instant speed, put a card in the graveyard, sack a land, get 2 lands, that's Harrow. And since Bane's ability triggers when non-token creatures die, we're going to want ways to sacrifice them. Viscera Seer is always going to be number 1 for your Sac Outlets. It's the cheapest a card can be. I guess 0 is technically possible. But 1 mana, no cost to sacrifice, and you get something from it. Honestly, I would play a 0 mana artifact that just let you sacrifice creatures for literally no benefit. Sacrifice a creature, nothing happens. I think Carrion Feeder is also interesting in this deck because it gets bigger as you're sacrificing things. And that's going to start to matter because the toughness is what we look at when a creature dies and we're putting a creature from our hand right into play. We're trying to cheat on mana here. So the next part of the deck exploration is going to be looking for big creatures. And by big, I mean mana value big that have low toughness. So these are the ones with really powerful abilities we're going to want to cheat in. Thief of Blood is a perfect example of this because it's a 6 mana 1/1, but it's not really a 1/1. It's going to enter the battlefield and steal all the counters off of everything, killing planeswalkers and being probably pretty big, potentially very big, and sometimes enormously big. Depends on your meta. Umbrous Fear Manifest, same thing. It's a 1/1 in our hand, but very likely that it'll be much bigger once it's on the battlefield. And if we want to do this at the front end too, for just 2 mana, we get White of Precinct 6. Again, 1/1 in hand, but most likely a lot bigger in the battlefield, especially if we're going to be able to do some milling. Foreshadowing? Now, at this point, you're probably saying to yourself, yeah, but you're never going to be able to do that. Bane doesn't give you the choice. It gives your opponents the choice. So unless you work out some sort of political deal, they're never going to let you put the creature in. You're always going to have to draw a card. I mean, that's not so bad, right? But if that's what's going to happen, let's lean into it. Chasm Skulker is a card where every time we draw a card, it gets bigger. And if it somehow dies or we sacrifice it, we get a ton of little squids that can't be blocked. For someone at the table, there's always a blue player. Unless we're the blue player. Toothy Imaginary Friend does a very similar thing, except this time instead of making squids, we're drawing cards. It's not a May though. If Toothy gets 100 counters on it, you will die. If Toothy gets removed. Onerophage, no crazy powerful abilities if this thing should die, but we're still making a huge flyer every time we draw a card. And except for Onerophage, they all start as 1/1s. Psychosis Crawler, this time every time we draw a card, they're taking damage. We're really asking our opponents to consider whether or not it makes sense to let us draw or just put something onto the battlefield. And my favorite for this, Triskaidekaphile. What are they going to do if we have 12 cards in our hand and we sacrifice a non-token creature? They're going to let us draw a card? I mean, they can't really, because then we'll just win on our upkeep. So they have to let us put something into the battlefield. But if they do that, we go down to 11 cards. Maybe we sack something else plus get a bomby effect from that thing we put in. How long can they keep this up? So now we're talking. Now we're sort of punishing them for letting us draw. We're really making this a tough decision for our opponents. There's no easy choice here unless our hand's empty. So potentially drawing a ton of cards means we'll have a big hand. We need to think about maximum hand size. Wizard class does everything we want to. It's a 1 mana enchantment that means we have no maximum hand size. But if we pay enough, we now get to turn any creature into an Onerophage or Chasm Skulker or Toothy or whatever. Just getting huge as we're drawing cards. Reliquary Tower, Nice, simple way to do it on a land. Always happy to have that. And there's that tome there's that tome, the no maximum hand size tome. What's the tome? Folio of Fancies. It's a folio. That's why I couldn't think of it. Not a tome. Well, technically a folio can be a tome, but not all tomes are folios. It has to do with how you fold the pages. They have to be folded in the middle, stapled or something that way. Who says Magic the Gathering doesn't teach you stuff? Anyway, we can make some players draw cards. We can make opponents mill themselves. I mentioned mill earlier, right? Let's talk about mill. If we're going to have a massive handful of cards because everyone's letting us draw all the time, we might want to consider wheeling. Specifically something like Jace's Archivist, those wheels where everybody draws up to the maximum number of cards discarded. We don't want people drawing the same number of cards they discard. We want to have a handful of like 15 cards, and we want everyone else to discard and go up to 15 so that we can do it again when we untap with Jace's Archivist and make everyone discard 15 this time. Heck, if we have Folio of Fancies going, we can also make them do another 15 and another 15. It's getting close to half of everybody's deck. I know half isn't important when you're milling people. It probably helps some people, but that's pretty impressive for just a little tick around the table. And if we're going mill, we gotta put Phoenix, God of Deception in. I mean, part of this deck is making these gigantic creatures that get huge for drawing cards. Our opponents might look at this as a way to prevent us from drawing cards, but again, it puts us in that tough position where are they going to let us draw more to make a bigger Chasm Skulker to be able to mill more, or are they just going to let us put something in for free? I don't envy their positions. And if we're going mill, we got to go Consuming Aberration. This thing gets huge with a little bit of mill going on. And of course, then once we're down this road, we're going to have to put an Altar of Dementia, because an Altar of Dementia with a Consuming Aberration means someone's probably out right away. I want to take 2 seconds and talk about conceding at instant speed. I think some people think you have to concede at sorcery speed, and I don't subscribe to that literally. I won't make someone sit there and concede when it's their turn, because it could be a while. Someone could be trying to do a storm kind of thing. But if someone wants to concede so that their graveyard disappears, so that your Consuming Aberration gets small, so that Altar of Dimension doesn't do much, I would propose to just say that, like, okay, if you're going to concede at instant speed, you're totally allowed to do that. But we're just going to pretend that you were still here for these effects. None of this conceding to take a game advantage here. If you're conceding, it's because you don't want to play, not because you're trying to affect the outcome of the game. That's my 2 cents. But we don't have to go mill. Maybe you're not a mill person. Maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you've already got a couple of mill decks and you don't want another one. Well, how about clones? Spark Double is one of my favorite clones because it comes down as a non-legendary, which helps further future clones, which means future clones can also be that non-legendary. It's great. And the thing about clones is that they have toughness of 0 while they're in your hand. So that means we will always get to trade them in no matter what dies on the battlefield. I know technically if an Elesh Norn comes down or something like that and our creatures get -2/-2, their toughness will be in the negatives perhaps. And the game knows this, so Bane won't let us put a 0 toughness creature out, but that's a pretty corner case. Clever Impersonator is another great clone that can hit non-creatures if we want to share something great that's on the table. And Vizier of Many Faces, I mean, even if we're not a dedicated mill, we'll put some stuff in our own graveyard, and if Vizier ends up there, we get to just cast it out of there. And again, I realize our opponents probably aren't going to make this choice. They're probably not going to let you drop something from your hand because it could be anything. The fear of the unknown is massive, but if we tip the scales far enough, they just might. And even those bold ones that decide to test the waters to be like, okay, no, I'll give you a creature. Let's see what you got. Just to see if your hand's empty. You drop something cool, maybe you drop a clone and you copy the best thing on the battlefield. They'll have to think twice before letting you do it again. It's just too much free value. The other thing I want to consider when we're brewing a deck around Bane is that the toughness of the creature in your hand has to be less than or equal to the toughness of the creature that died. And one way to make sure we will always be able to do whatever shenanigans possible in case our opponents take a little gamble on us, I'm talking Anthems. You put a couple of Anthems out and the creatures on the battlefield will always be bigger than the creatures in our hands, because as soon as they hit the battlefield, they become bigger. Angel of Invention, Intrepid Adversary, Ravos Soul Tender, all of these things come down with relatively low toughnesses, and they give the creatures +1/+1. And in Ravos' case, we're getting cards back out of the graveyard to use again for other things. It's a very excellent card. You've been waiting a long time. We'll get to the Batman stuff, okay? You ready? So I was thinking about creatures dying. That's the key to the deck. Non-token creatures that die, and they'll probably ask us to draw instead of putting a creature out. So if we've got a huge hand, we want cheap creatures to play. And the easiest way to get creatures to die is to turn them sideways, put them in combat. Eventually our opponents will have to either trade or chump or just die. All three are acceptable choices. So I'm looking at 2-mana 3/1s for the most part. They turn sideways pretty well. Maybe there's an Anthem or two to make them formidable threats, and they have tiny toughnesses. So I'll always be able to put them out if I get the choice. And if they make me draw them, it only costs me 2 mana to put them out. Loyal Warhound, another kind of ramp type strategy in the deck. This is a way we can get an extra planes out there if we get it early, and it's a 3/1 with Vigilance. Give me Skyclave Shade. Here's a card that keeps coming back out of the graveyard, so if it does die in combat, we'll get to draw that card the first time, and we will probably draw a card in the future when it dies again. Can't block, which is relevant, which means we can't use it in defense, but with all these 3/1s, I don't think we're trying to be defensive. And something like Cathar Commandos, such a great add to the white piece of the color pie. It's a 2-mana flash 3/1. That's great. We can eat a creature on defense if we want to. We can destroy an artifact or an enchantment. And that whole deal, flash it in for 2, destroy an artifact or an enchantment for 1. 3 mana is a fair rate for that. But with all this flexibility, I really like this card. And if we got a board that's wide enough of 3/1s, our opponents are going to start thinking about wrathing things. And if they are thinking about it, then they might be more inclined to just kind of let us put extra creatures out, hoping that they'll die from that sort of thing. But still, we can run stuff like Malevolent Hermit. Now their wraths cost 3 more if they want to fire them off. Or something like Draining Welk. I mean, Draining Welk is something that has to come down while the spell's on the stack, so it's a lot less likely to happen. But if you can ever snipe something, for sure. But imagine this scenario. A Wrath on the stack. Things are about to die. You sack a non-token creature. They might be inclined to let you put something from your hand down because, well, the Wrath's going to get it too. I might as well give you one less trigger to deal with. But then you drop something like a Draining Welk and we just counter the spell, so my whole board's here. And even if they do Wrath, all those triggers will go on the stack as Bane dies along with everything else, so we'll at least get to put a whole bunch of new things on the battlefield, or we'll draw a bunch of cards. Both seem pretty decent. I promised the Batman stuff was coming, and here it is. Batman, Bane, arch enemies. I mean, not as arch as the Joker, I suppose, but they're, they don't like each other. They like to get into some scraps. Maybe it isn't Batman that is the only person who had a love affair with a specific rodent. Maybe in an alternate universe, Bane also fell in love with a certain other type of creature, a rat. In a colony. Rat colony. Ratman versus Batman. Bane is Ratman. I think there's something here. But Rat Colony is the perfect X1 for this kind of deck. We're just going to dump out a ton of rats. They're all going to have massive power, so they have to be blocked. They'll die. We'll either draw a card or put more rats out. And of course, we're going to sneak in a couple of brutal creatures in there that they can't afford to just let us drop something, because we'll drop some brutal creature that costs 7 mana that does something awesome that we talked about. And the best part is we have access to blue and white, so we do have all those blue counterspell type of creatures to protect our board if need be. And we've got sorceries like Secret Salvage, which will just get all of the rats out of our deck and put them in our hand, so they certainly can't let us just drop things from our hand at this point. And my favorite part about this deck is if we have access to white, we can run Immortal Servitude. I friggin' love this card. For 5 mana, we can get all of the rats back from our graveyard into the battlefield. It doesn't have flash, so we're going to want to do something with haste, and unfortunately in these colors, we got to look to Crashing Drawbridge or Achroma's Memorial. One of those cards is over $10. The other one is a gumball. I'll let you guess which one is which. But even if we can't give the team haste with all these rats, there is another way around that. We're running blue, so maybe we just run an extra turn or two. It's not technically haste, but we get to attack with them all. This is fun. I'm a big fan of the rat version, the Ratman. Bane, Ratman versus Batman. What's Bane's real name? Tried looking it up and it doesn't seem to be a one definitive answer. Depends which universe or media you're looking at. In any case, this was a fun brew. I liked going on this journey, and I think Bane is better than people are giving him credit for. A lot of people are criticizing this set for being a little bit underpowered. There's not a ton of commanders they'll want to brew around, and I think this was fun. This seems like a fun deck. I really want to try out the rats version. Well, I hope you had fun going on this journey with me. Make sure to come back next week when we'll talk about another deck from Baldur's Gate, or maybe another Batman villain. I don't know. This is pretty fun. In any case, keep being you. The world is a better place for it. See you next time.